Hi everyone, this is Jim. Welcome to this Blitz chess postmortem, a postmortem of my Blitz game number 426. My opponent kicked off with e4 and I chose to play e6, the French defense. So we get the normal moves, d4, d5, and now my opponent chooses the exchange variation. You can see that's the fourth choice here in the database, top choice being knight c3, the win hour, or classical variation, knight d2, the Tarrasch, or e5, the advanced variation. But E takes, the exchange variation, is a respectable way to play. I take back. And just creates a symmetrical pawn structure. Both sides have 4 pawns on one side and 3 pawns on the other side. And that's considered somewhat drawish in nature. We see white still has that typical kind of opening edge due to the advantage of the first move, and a pretty simple development plan, so it's an easy way for white to play. Bishop to d3, knight f3, these are typical moves. My opponent starts with the bishop move, and I go knight f6. I'm going to set up my pieces symmetrically, kind of logically. And he played h3 here. The normal move is continuing with knight f3. So h3, though, has some points here, and we're just out of the opening book at this point. It is preventing me from pinning his knight. He wants to place his knight to f3, and he doesn't want my bishop coming to g4 and pinning the knight. So he just controls that square with the h-pawn, and you'll see it doesn't give away too much. But you know, I could have played a little more actively than I did. I go bishop d6, knight here, and then I suppose if I want to prove some kind of advantage against this h-pawn, prove that it was a wasted move, I could just castle. But you know, I thought this pin was a bit awkward myself, so I played the move h6, and so we get once again a very symmetric position. My opponent plays queen e2. Check, and I go bishop e6. And then he goes bishop to, sorry, not that bishop, this bishop. I always get surprised. He plays this bishop to f5, taking advantage of the pin and putting more pressure on my bishop. But it is a questionable move because he's developing a piece twice in the opening, moving a piece twice in the opening, and leaving his queen side undeveloped. So, you know, I don't really think that's the best move here. And I really should just defend my bishop with queen to d7 or queen to e7. Queen e7 would also break the pin, so maybe a little more accurate, but I think either of those moves would be fine. Instead I castled, which is a mistake, and now he can just take here, and then he can take again with the queen, although he didn't do that. If he takes with the queen, it's a check, and so I don't have time to pin the queen against the king here, which is, I guess I was relying on that to defend kind of an indirect defense of the pawn. It just doesn't work. He could have taken, and then I have to move, or if I move my rook to f2, that'll create another pin. So just move my king out of the way, and now I'm threatening rook to e8, but he can just castle, get his king away from the e-file, and when I hit his queen, the queen can retreat to f5. Or even, as the chess engine points out, the queen can come forward to f7. So it's got a couple squares it can go to, and everything is just fine for white. White is snagged a pawn and is just better here. So that's really what the white player should have played here. Instead, he castled, and now I play queen d7, defending the pawn. And we're back in the range of about even. So c3, showing up the center. Knight c6, I keep developing pieces. Knight bd2, and his development is a bit awkward. This pawn on c6 blocks the knight, so he has to develop the knight here, which blocks the bishop, and so his pieces are a bit clogged up. And so at this point, actually, black has a slight edge, not a huge one. Anyway, I continue with normal developing moves, putting a rook on the e-file. And he goes rook to e1, which is a mistake. Right now he needs to do something. I have this plan of just pushing the e-pawn forward. This is the one weakness in my camp, this e-pawn. If I can just push it forward and dissolve it, I'll just have the better position here because I'll have an advantage in development, and otherwise the position will be equal. So I just have to liquidate this one weakness. And he can try and saddle me with this weakness permanently by putting the knight here, or at least for a while. Putting the knight there and just trying to hold on to it. Now if I take with the knight, of course, he's going to take back with the pawn and fork these two pieces. So I have to, if I am going to take that knight, I have to take with the bishop. And I don't really want to do that, so probably I would move the queen, as the engine is suggesting queen. Queen to d8 is a reasonable move here. And the game would continue here with some slight edge to white. So instead my opponent played rook to e1, putting some pressure on the e-pawn, but it's sort of ignoring the fact that I already can play e5. I have enough force to support this, and I do. So after the exchanges, he takes, knight takes, knight takes. I decide to take with the rook. Either rook or bishop would be fine here. Just wanted to chase his queen back and exchange off another one of his developed pieces. So he takes with the queen. You see, I've left him with these two undeveloped pieces and traded off all the developed pieces. Now I have a significant edge here, and not yet a winning edge, but it should be a pretty comfortable game with accurate play. So I play bishop to c5. I guess that's okay, targeting the f2 pawn. And he plays a good move here. He plays knight f3, which blocks the rook. Otherwise, the rook and the bishop were threatening to coordinate against f2. But the knight on f3 blocks the rook. And now I go rook e8, switching the attention of the rook to the e file, putting the rook on a good file and gaining a tempo on the queen. Knight to e4, I guess, is something I could have tried here. But he can defend with bishop e3, and this just doesn't lead to much. If there's some more exchanges now, his rook is able to get into the game, and things are looking pretty even. So rook e8 is not a bad choice. Putting the rook on an open file, chasing the queen. The queen goes to d1, and I play c6 here, shoring up my center. He was putting a little bit of pressure on it. c6 was not strictly necessary, actually. At this point, I could have played more actively with queen to e6. Yeah, that's interesting. Getting the queen away from any pins, although the queen is defended by the knight there, so it's not a true pin. Anyway, c6 I played, defending the center. Knight to d4 now, putting the knight on a good square, and queen over to e7. So I decided to line up on the e file anyway, although because of where the knight is, I couldn't go to the e6 square, so I went to e7. Bishop to e3. So gradually he's unwinding, and my advantage is still, I have a slight advantage, but it's not really that great anymore. Knight to e4, I jump the knight into this good square. And he goes knight to f5, harassing my queen. Queen to f6. So all pretty normal moves. Now knight back to d4. I guess he couldn't find anything real great to do with the knight there. If we back up, looks like the chess engine is recommending exchanging pieces here, and I don't know, the more pieces come off, the more drawish this becomes. I still have a slight edge because I have maybe an extra pawn in the center, but this is not a lot to bank on. Anyway, knight back to d4, so a little bit of maneuvering. I drop the bishop back to b6, so my knight is free to move, and my bishop isn't left undefended on the on the c5 square. And maybe the bishop will come to c7 at some point, and I can get a battery on this diagonal. He goes queen to c2. And I push on with c5. Oh, that was the other idea of dropping the bishop back, was to open up the square on c5 for the pawn. So kicking his knight. But, well, his knight has a good square on c5, and my pawns are a little bit loose here. So the advantage is pretty much gone. And my idea was to push on with d4. And this fails. This loses to a tactic which he played in the game, and I didn't spot until too late. The problem is, yeah, I have to notice it at this point. When I push on with d4, it gives up the square on c4 for his queen to deliver a check. And so after this exchange, pawn takes, queen here, check. I'm just losing the pawn. I had enough force to defend the pawn, but now he's just winning the pawn back. So the king has to move out of the way. He plays bishop takes, and now he's got the advantage here. And this is a significant advantage. There's a lot of force has already been removed from the board, and he's got a winning pawn up endgame if he can just get rid of all the material on the board. And I can't really avoid this trade. He was threatening my queen. Queen takes. And now I try to avoid further trades with queen c6. But then he can activate his last piece, so now all his pieces are playing. And I really have nothing to play for here except trying to survive. I drop back my knight to f6. He plays knight e5, coming in an attacking my queen. I drop back to c2, cancel that. I go forward to c2. Okay, I go for some counterplay. There's still this pawn on f2, which may be weak. But everything is defended here. He goes a3, not wanting to leave a pawn weakness behind. I guess at some point that a pawn might become loose. I go b6 because, well, for similar reasons, I don't want to give up a pawn over here on the queen side. He goes rook to d2, chasing my queen back. Throw in this check. King goes to h2. And then I drop back to f5. Once again, looking at the f2 square, but it's really completely defended by his queen and his rook. And the rook is pretty well placed here, defending on both sides of the board. And the rook itself is defended by the queen. And the knight can always drop back to f3 to hold things together. So right now he's completely safe, and he can turn his attention to the attack. And he starts with this move, knight to f7 check. I go to g8. Probably h7 is a little bit better choice. But if I go to the problem with king to h7, that's what I meant to say. The problem with king to h7 is it puts it on a diagonal with the queen, so he can play the queen back here and force a trade of queens, and I really don't want that. But the other move also has problems. I go king g8, he goes knight to d6. And let's see, what do I have to play? I have to play queen e5 check to stay on the game. And once again, so he's found a way to force a trade of queens. He's forking these two pieces, and the only way out of it is to trade queens. I threw in one more. What did I play? I played rook f8. Yeah, I guess I momentarily forgot my queen was hanging, but it was going to be a lost endgame anyway, so I resigned at this point. So, interesting game. It shows how your advantage can easily slip away with one little imprecise move, and White did a nice job of picking up on the mistake and taking advantage of it. Hope you guys enjoyed it. Leave any comments you have in the section below, and I will see you again soon.